Hi everybody, welcome back. This is the 7th in a series of tips from the In the Field section of my new book, The AMC Guide to Outdoor Digital Photography. And in last week's tip, I talked about maximizing depth of field by using a small aperture like f/16. But what I didn't talk about is shutter speed. And with a static landscape where nothing is moving, your shutter speed doesn't really matter. Just, put your camera on a tripod and use whatever shutter speed gives you the proper exposure at the f-stop you've chosen. But if you have motion in the frame, you need to consider the shutter speed. You need to decide, do I want to stop that action or do I want to let it blur? So when you stop the action in a photograph, you freeze those water droplets in a white water stream, or you freeze a hiker or a runner in mid-stride, you're creating an image with a lot of energy because there's implied energy there that those things have to drop. It's a really great look for photos. And you need a fast shutter speed to do that. And I'm talking 1/250th of a second or faster. If, say I have a runner or wildlife running towards me, I'll want 1/250th or 1/500th. If they're moving across the frame, 1/500th of a second or faster. If you do that, you'll stop that action and create that sense of energy. Now, often, especially like, a place like this in the woods, there's not a lot of light here. It's hard to get a shutter speed like 1/500th of a second, especially if you wanted to use f8 or f11 small aperture like that. So in that case, you need to increase your ISO, which increases the light sensitivity of your camera's sensor and will give you the opportunity to shoot at a faster shutter speed. So instead of shooting at, say, ISO 100, you might need to shoot at ISO 400 or 800 or 1600 to get that fast shutter speed. And for example, with this video right now, I had to bump that camera up to ISO 1600 even to get to just 1/50th of a second, which is the shutter speed I needed to shoot this video. On the other hand, if you use a slow shutter speed, you can blur the motion in the scene. And instead of having that feeling of energy that you get by stopping action, you more define the motion. You feel the motion as it moves through the frame in a blurred photograph. And what I do for that is I'll usually shoot at 1/30th of a second, 1/15th of a second. I'll hold the camera steady so that my background remains relatively sharp, but the person or animal that's moving through the frame is blurred, and you get that sense of movement, of motion. And an alternative thing I'll do sometimes is I'll actually shoot at an even slower shutter speed, say 1/8th of a second, and I'll pan with the person as they're hiking through the woods or running through the woods. And what that does, it blurs your background, but it gives a sense of definition, a sharper image of the person in the frame, and it's a really neat effect that I like to do. And sometimes I'll add a little fill flash to that too to help better define that person, better sharpen them up a little bit against that blurry background. Now in nature scenes, when you have streams and waterfalls and things like that, using a slower shutter speed can give you that great sort of silky water effect that you see in whitewater photos. And for that, I'll usually try to shoot at 1/8th of a second down to 2 seconds or 4 seconds, somewhere in there, and that'll really help give you that milky effect to the water. Now, just like with stopping action, sometimes you need to bump up the ISO to get that shutter speed you want. Sometimes with the slower shutter speeds, if you can't get the shutter speed slow enough with a good exposure, even at, say, ISO 100 and f/16, you need to put a filter on the lens to reduce the amount of light coming through. So you can use a polarizing filter if you have that. That'll reduce the light by a couple of stops and let you use a slower shutter speed. Or you can buy what's called a neutral density filter. You can get variable ones that let you dial in 2 to 8 stops and really darken up that exposure so you can use really long shutter speeds, even in relatively bright situations. Sometimes I'll do that out on the coast, shooting even at 2-minute long exposures. What that does, instead of getting like the silky water effect of the surf, it creates sort of a foggy, misty effect, a real mystical look to the photos, and I love the way that can look sometimes. But you can't necessarily do it without having that variable neutral density filter. Okay, so that's this week's tip. Get out there and try different shutter speeds. Learn what you need to do to stop action and what shutter speeds you like for blurring motion in your photos. For more tips and to learn about my book, The AMC Guide to Outdoor Digital Photography, visit monkmanphoto.com.